if my capacity for self-control is exercised while something is still hard for me, that's the ashrei. That it's talking about a person in the prime of their life or in the prime of this particular challenge that they have. That's what it's referring to. It's not referring to a person who, by virtue of the fact that something is no longer a challenge, I don't know that we can call that success necessarily. This is something that's actually true in the life of David HaMelech himself. We'll touch on that maybe somewhere down the road, as far as him dealing with his own struggles with self-control and how that's reflected sort of on later on in his life. We then moved on. In the beginning of the parak, we spoke about the three categories of people, which I won't repeat. We did that last time, but I would like to repeat, and I'm going to share my screen here in a second, but I would like to focus on the following idea. Okay, so we see here that there are these three categories of people. And I think we mentioned last time, we used Rav Hirsch's definition to describe these three different people. And I think we mentioned as well that Rashi here, I think we mentioned this, I'm not sure, that Rashi here says, if you stand in the path or follow the path of the way, the Rasha, or you stand in the place where the chata is. It's not a chait, it's a chata here. Or if you sit, if you keep company with the leitzim, with the scoffers. So Rashi points out, you really think like, really, this is so bad. And Rashi makes the point that one thing tends to lead to the other. And we're all familiar with how this happens. I heard actually a beautiful Dvar Torah last night in the name of Rav Shmuel Golden I believe from Englewood, who actually points out that this is the story of Lot, our favorite nephew of Avraham that we learn about so often. Like, where did he go wrong? It's hard to imagine that someone grew up in the house of Avraham, was raised, tutored by him, in every aspect of life, not just religiously, but in his moral behavior, his ethical behavior. Avraham was his everything. Avraham was his world. What happens to Lot that he ends up in Sodom? And Rabbi Golden pointed out, and just in the interest of time, I'll mention this without showing you the psukim, but what Rabbi Golden points out is that when we first see that Lot and Avraham separate, so the language that's used is that Avraham goes one way and Lot vayehal ad Sodom, that he tents, right? He sets up camp, right? It seems on the outskirts. Ad Sodom is a weird way of talking about where a person settles themselves. And so he's right on the verge of Sodom. He's on the border of Sodom. And then the next thing we know, we meet Lot again a little bit later, and he is living in Sodom. He's living actually in the city of Sodom. And eventually, Lot is not just your average Sodom citizen. He is sitting by the Sha'arei Ha'ir. He's sitting by the gates of the city. And we know in Tanakh, always when someone is referred to as sitting by the gates of the city, that means they are one of the most important, if not the most important people in that city. And of course, Chazal tell us that he became like their Supreme Court justice. He had risen to the top of the Sodom infrastructure. And of course, what that shows us, and Rabbi Golden points out, it's a beautiful illustration, an unfortunate, but a really accurate illustration of what takes place here in Pasuk Aleph, which is that even if a person thinks like, I would never live in Sodom, I would never associate with those people, but I could live close to Sodom because, it's beautiful there. And then the next thing you know, it's so beautiful, but I could live within Sodom and not be influenced by my neighbors. And then, of course, the next thing we know, of course, is that he's the king of the Sodomers, essentially, and his behavior reflects that, unfortunately. So just like a note to ourselves, the influence, of course, that our surroundings have on us, it is sometimes subtle, but it is always there. And that is one of the ideas of these three categories of people. In particular, let's just now move on into some new material based on just this last phrase. I just want to focus on this last phrase for a moment. Uvemoshav leitzim lo yashav, right? That he doesn't join the company. This praiseworthy, fortunate, happy person is, or we said according to Rav Hirsch, the one who is moving forward, that he doesn't keep company with the leitzim. Leitzim, as we mentioned, are the scoffers, those who make fun, meaning they're not risha'im or chata'im, that they don't follow the rules. Oh, they follow the rules, all right. They keep Torah, they keep mitzvot, they're doing all the right things. They just sit in the corner and make fun of it the whole time. right? They're not willing to separate themselves from the community. No, no, no. Instead, right, unfortunately, the damage is so much greater because they're part of the community, right? They actually maintain their connection, social, religious, etc. They're not willing to walk away. They're not rishayim. They're not chataim, right? But in fact, their damage is much more. It's much more insidious. The impact that it has. Could arguably be more significant because they are members of the community. They're hanging out with everybody. And in particular, where do the scoffers, where do the scorners, those people who like to make fun, where do they hang out? Well, they don't stand and they don't walk. They are sitting and schmoozing, right? They are b'moshav leitzim. They sit and they schmooze and they call you over to join them. And the next thing you know, you're not just walking by them or standing near them, you're actually sitting down and you're enjoying their company. And one thing leads to another. And you've been incredibly influenced by this group of people. And as we said, one could argue that the damage done by this group, because it's not black and white, it's much more gray, right? They're your friends. They're your community members. And when they have something negative, when they have something critical to say, that's going to have a much greater impact on the group than if they had separated themselves completely, like the Rishayim and the Chataim. Rav Hirsch points out that when would a person be b'moshav leitzim? When would a person find themselves hanging out with these people? Well, he basically says, not in these words, but what he basically says is that would never happen during business hours, right? When a person is busy, when they're being productive, they don't have time for this kind of schmoozing and making fun and being scornful and critical and cynical. They don't have time for that. They're working. So if you happen to work among these people, it's not such a problem, meaning it's not within your control. Very often we can choose our environment, but more often we cannot. And who we work with and who we associate with, whether it's in our business lives or in our personal lives, very often is not up to us, says Rav Hirsch. But what we can choose very often is who our leisure time is spent with. And that's what David HaMelech is warning us against, right? To say that you'll never associate, interact, or have anything to do with somebody in the category of a leitz, it's not realistic. That's not realistic. But what is perhaps slightly more realistic is the idea that you could avoid having your downtime, your leisure time be with these people. That's the danger, right? Passing by a short interaction, even a business dealing, you could protect yourself. But as soon as you engage in this schmooze time, as soon as it becomes informal and casual, so that's where we tend to run into trouble. And so David HaMelech, according to Rav Hirsch, is advising us to avoid spending our downtime with this group of people. That ends Pasuk Aleph. If a person were to think that they can be this Ashrei Ha'ish, this praiseworthy, happy, fortunate, forward-moving person, and all they have to do is abstain, refrain, have self-control. Well, I'm not saying we would all be doing so much better, but we would be doing better perhaps than we are. What David HaMelech then continues in Pasuk Bet with is to let us know that actually that's not enough, right? Abstaining from evil, not doing the wrong thing, is a great first step. And it sets the stage for a person to become very successful. And like Rav Hirsch has told us, for them to make progress, to move forward in their life and their spiritual life and what they want to accomplish in this world. But it's not enough on its own. And so he begins Pasuk Bet with the word ki. Ki, Rav Hirsch here translates as but. It's not a because, it's a but here. There we go. And a person shouldn't think that if you get Pasuk Aleph under control, you end maybe those relationships that are having a negative influence on you, or you learn how to keep your distance, that now you can pack up shop and go vacation somewhere lovely and tropical. And you're going to, be successful and have your place in the world to come and you're all set. Unfortunately, that's not going to do it. That's not enough. Says David HaMelech, ki im b'torat Hashem chetzo, right? Rather, or but, right? If the teaching, and of course, Torah if you need to translate Torah to English, it's not Torah, it's actually teaching, or some people say law, but teaching, I think, is a really great translation of the word Torah. I'll just point out that it is very much related to the words lehorot, right, to show or to teach, as well as horim, parents, mora, teachers, they're all wrapped up in each other. The meanings are all very much connected. It's the same shoresh, it's the same roots, and it means teaching, modeling. So a person can accomplish what is written in Pasuk Aleph, but now they have their work set out for them. Now this is what they need to do. B'torat Hashem chavtzo. The person needs to have a desire. They need to, as the translation here says, it has to be their delight. Okay, it's not the best translation. The word chayfetz or chafetz, like we know from chafetz chaim, means a chayfetz itself is an object or something that's a desired object. But chafetz, when a person they're seeking something, it actually, Rav Hirsch points out, it's related to the word lechapes, that the sin and the tzadi are interchangeable to a certain degree, that they're connected, and that it means lechapes, to search, but lachfotz means to search intensively. It doesn't just mean I'm looking, I misplaced something and I'm looking for it. That's lechapes. I can't find my phone, so I'm mechapeset. I'm looking for it. I'm looking, but I'm not like frantic. But if it's something that, I lost my wedding ring or something, right? That's a chayfetz. I'm not just going to casually look for that. I'm going to search with passion. That's what chafetz is. So rather, what is David HaMelech saying? That yes, we need to refrain from hanging out with all of these people. And then I need to make the Torah a chayfetz. I need to seek it out, search it, have passion for it. And then u'v'torato yehageh yomam v'layla. And then my study of Torah, I should be involved in it day or night. So let's just take this apart a little bit. You'll notice that in the pasuk it goes from Torat Hashem to Torato. So you could translate this as meaning the same thing, the Torah of Hashem, and then U'v'torato also refers to the Torah of Hashem. But I saw a beautiful idea from where did I say it from? The Shevet Musar. I think he was Sephardi, so we'll call him Shevet Musar. He's from Turkey. And he says that this is very purposeful, that David HaMelech starts out by telling us, Ki im b'torat Hashem chavtzo. You know how you need to start? You need to learn. And when you learn and you desire to study the Torah, Hashem's Torah, Torat Hashem, right? And we all acknowledge it is his. It's our best way of getting to know him. It's the way that he shared himself with us in this world in a language that we can try at least to understand, try to grasp, try to get closer to him. It's Torat Hashem for sure. But what happens when a person makes Torat Hashem their chayfetz, when it becomes their greatest desire? You know what happens? It becomes u'v'torato. It becomes that person's Torah. And this is an interesting thing. I've been in conversations in different places. I can't pinpoint which communities I've been in where people talk like this, but I've heard people say, oh, so-and-so, I really like their Torah, right? And what they mean is they like how that person, not just how they teach, they like the content of what they teach. They like their messages. They like the way that they share information. They like the whole package. But it's just a funny thing to say that it's this person. Oh, I like that person's Torah. What do you mean? The Torah belongs to Hashem. So the Shevet Musar says something beautiful, which is that the more a person desires to study the Torah of Hashem, so what they're going to discover is it's not just that it's Torato, which is a nice idea. It becomes yours. You own it. He actually says something fascinating, and it's a beautiful idea, that every person, we're familiar with the idea that every person's neshama, every soul was there to receive the Torah. We're all familiar with that idea. What it means is maybe a little bit more complicated to understand, but we're familiar with the idea. What the Shevet Musar points out is that the more a person studies, is that what he's going to discover, what she's going to discover is, oh, this really speaks to me. There are so many different types of Torah learning, right? A person can study Halacha, Jewish law. A person can study Mishnah, Gemara, right? Torah Shabbal Peh. A person can study Midrash. A person can study Tanakh. A person can study a particular book of Tanakh. A person can study with a particular commentary to Tanakh. A person could be a Tehilim Jew, a Halacha Jew, a Gemara Mishnah Jew. That the more a person studies, that what we should be looking for is sort of our calling within Torah. So maybe we're familiar with this idea from like we're looking for our calling, our mission, our purpose in this world. And very often, that causes a lot of a lot of existential angst. Like, did I pick the right career? Am I doing the right thing with myself? I want to be fulfilling my tafkid. I want to be fulfilling my mission and purpose in this world. So that's a serious thing that we all have to contemplate. What the Shevet Musar points out is that that's not just true in your professional life or in your volunteer life. It's true in your study of the Torah that what you should be looking for is the thing that speaks to you the most, the thing that draws your neshama, so to speak. And when you find that thing, own it, stick with it, right? Of course, you have an obligation to study as much of the Torah as possible, and you should try to make as much of it relevant and familiar to yourself as possible. But don't feel bad. Don't feel bad if you're really a Tehilim Jew. There's nothing to feel bad. It's a beautiful thing if you have realized that this is the piece of Torah that speaks the most to you, and make it yours. Make it ubitorato. And then once you find out what it is, yehegeh yomam v'layla. Make it what's coming out of your mouth, what you're expressing, what you're articulating. Yehegeh is not just talking. Yehegeh is like from, we say it very often. David HaMelech uses this word often. Hashem Svatai, no, Hagyon libi lefanecha, right? That the expression, but it's an active word. It's not just like, it's not writing, it's specifically actively articulating, expressing. So once a person discovers where their Torah is, so to speak, and again, it could be any aspect of Torah learning, it could be in Jewish philosophy, it could be in anything, then dive in and make that your Torah, yomam v'layla, morning and night. Morning generally, or daytime generally, refers to like your more formal hours, and Lila we know generally refers to times when things are a bit more casual, right? So, maybe you have your formal learning during the day, and then you sort of play around with it at night, meaning you look for a lighter understanding, or you look for something that's personally meaningful, that's maybe not like such heavy duty learning during the day, and maybe at night you do something a little lighter, but you seek to bring this part, this piece, this Torato into both parts of your life, both your more formal and your more informal times of your life. So the Shevet Musar, I did a little bit of searching online, and it's just interesting. He shares a beautiful story. He shares a story about the Alshech. The Alshech, Rav Moshe Alshech, who wrote a very famous commentary on Tanakh. So he was born in Turkey, and he makes his way to Tzfat at some point. And he lived in Tzfat at the time where we all wish we had lived in Tzfat, right? During the time where Tzfat was the hub of not just mysticism and Kabbalah, but it was the time of Torah learning in general. When Rabbi Yosef Cairo was writing the Shulchan Aruch, I mean, it was really like the heyday of Jewish learning, the golden age of Jewish learning in Tzfat in those years. And he, in fact, was a student of Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Alshech. He got smicha from him. And the Shevet Musar I think the Shevet Musar relates the story. I'm not sure if I just saw it somewhere else. An amazing story about the Alshech that just relates this point. We think the Alshech, that's like one of those names, even if you never studied the Alshech, but maybe you've heard of him. He's a world-renowned commentary on Tanakh. So the story goes that he comes to Tzfat and he's studying with Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and he is an outstanding student. And in fact, he's developing his own following. He became someone himself who had tremendous following amongst the Talmidei Chachamim of Tzfat. But there was something missing. He lived at the time also of the Ari, right? The greatest Mikubal. And it was very close with Moshe Cordovero and many of the other Kabbalists that we know lived in Tzfat around that time. And he had a habit of going to the Ari and begging on almost a daily basis to let him in, that the Alshech was begging for himself to be let into the Ari's shiurim on Kabbalah. And the Ari would not let him in. He wouldn't let him in. He kept saying, I don't know why you need to come here. You're busy doing good things. You have students, you're learning Tanakh, you're writing commentary. Why you keep bothering me? The Alshech kept saying to him, my life isn't full. I have to join you. I want to learn from you. I want to learn Kabbalah from you. So finally, the Arizal relents and he lets him into Shir. And as the story goes, whether it's true or not, I don't know if that matters so much, but as the story goes, he finally gets into the Shir of the Arizal, and he falls asleep. Not just one day, not just the second day, every day. It went on for quite a while. but not just like fell asleep, like dozed off, like that might happen to some of us sometimes when we're in a class. I mean, he was out and he got nothing out of the shiur. So, the sources for this story talk about that in and of itself is like a mystical thing, because to fall into such a deep sleep when you're in the presence of the Arizal, after you begged and begged and begged to be there, it's that in and of itself. It's just not so, that doesn't really make sense. So there was something more mystical happening. So after a number of days, he says to the Ari, like, I don't know what to say. This is humiliating. It's horrifying. What's happening here? So the Ari says to him, basically, I'll, use my own words, sweetheart, Hashem gave you a gift. He gave you a gift, which was to study Tanakh, to teach Tanakh, and not just to study it, but to add layers and to uncover layers and layers of meaning in Tanakh. In another life, you were a big Makobal, a big one. But you spent so much time on Kabbalah and you totally ignored the rest of Torah. That's why you had to come back. And that's why you have this job to uncover these layers of Tanakh. If it's yours and if it speaks to you and it's so clearly where your passion is and where your talent is, stop trying to make yourself an expert in everything. Listen to your heart. Listen to your heart. Your heart tells you Tanakh is your thing. It's true. Tanakh is your thing. And, as all good stories go, he learned his lesson. He never bothered the Ari again. But it's interesting because if you look at the biography of the Alshech, so towards the end of his life, he spends tons of time with other Mekubalim, just not the Arizal, but it's a good story anyway. So the idea here is to study the Torah, to study as much of it as we can, but to keep our eyes and our hearts open to figure out which piece of the Torah speaks the most to us. And when we find that, to go with it, to run with it, and to immerse ourselves in it both day and night. I should point out that this sefer, the Shevet Musar, which I mentioned, I heard about it in a share from someone named Rabbi Avi Zakatinsky, who I do not know, but I was listening to his classes, so I just want to give him credit for introducing me to this sefer. So now what's going to happen? If the person stays away from the bad influences and then they immerse themselves in Torah and they find that it is their passion, it is the thing that they seek with tremendous devotion and dedication, and maybe even they're blessed to find their own calling among the Torah, amidst the Torah, and immerse themselves in it day and night, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen is Pasuk Gimel. In Pasuk Gimel, David HaMelech tells us, this person is going to become Ke'etz Shatul al Palgei Mayim. He's going to become, a tree planted by streams, by brooks of water. And not only that, it will have fruits at the right season, its leaves will never wither, and everything that this person touches is going to turn to gold. Yatzliach, it will thrive. So let's just take apart this phrase a little bit at the beginning. Eitz shatul al palgei mayim. Interesting. First, I think you'll notice also there's quite a bit of alliteration in this parak, which I didn't notice it, but when you keep reading the same thing over and over again, you start to notice new things. So the whole beginning, ashrei ha'ish asher, there's a lot of sha there, which I want to touch on that at the end. And then you'll see that ba'atzat rishaim, and now eitz and atzah, they're related, and it's going to come up again later also, the idea of eitzah. So this tree has been planted by a brook. Now, very often, the word for planted is natua, right? If something has been planted, that's generally the word that's used. But many of the commentators point out, including Rav Hirsch, that shatul is not a regular planting. Shatul implies, and if anybody went to Camp Marasha, so this is where Shtili comes from, Shtilim, it's like one of the younger groups in the camp. So shatul refers to when a tree or a sapling really was planted in one place, it was uprooted from that place, and then it was planted in a more ideal place. Meaning you planted a tree, but you realized, and it grew for a bit, but then you realized that there's a much better source of water, they'll have more sun, it'll just be more successful in the soil that's in a different place. And so you purposefully uproot that plant and you choose to put it somewhere else. This is sort of a beautiful, almost personification of what we talked about with this person, meaning this person has chosen to remove themselves from the company of certain people and plant themselves in a place that is more conducive to their growth, right? So the idea is sort of repeating itself, but now David HaMelech is using the language of planting and uprooting a tree. Very nice idea. And the fact that it's planted not just by one source of water, it's planted al palge mayim, by several brooks, more than one. This is also a beautiful idea. And the Gemara actually picks up on this idea that one could argue, okay, it's a good idea to, cover all your bases, plant your trees near more than one source of water, because in case one dries up, you always have another, right? That's a good idea. But the Gemara actually learned something quite beautiful from this, an idea that I think is something that we all need to sort of internalize to a certain degree, which is the following. The Gemara says, Kol halome Torah me'rav echad, a person who studies Torah from one teacher, eino roeh siman bracha. That person doesn't see blessing. They don't see signs of blessing. Now, Chazal, our sages, very often talk like that. They'll make these like big dramatic statements. I want to sort of like temper it a bit and just sort of explain how I understood it. On the, I think, most basic surface level, what Chazal are telling us is that you should have more than one source for your Torah learning, right? In general, we know Shivim Panim La Torah. There are 70 faces to the Torah. We know the Gemara in particular, the Mishnah, the Gemara, are chock full of this Rav debating this one, which was, proven and then disproven. And we are filled with the idea of there's more than one approach to the Torah, right? Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. I mean, the lists go on and on. There are so many couples, the Zugo, the people who argued against each other. The Melchemta Shel Torah, the war of Torah, implies that there's always more than one side. So it shouldn't be that a person limits themselves to one approach. This is really the beauty of continuing to learn the same thing year after year, because even though maybe it starts to get repetitive, but as we've spoken about many times, when you open up a text years later, or maybe even a year later, because your life circumstance has changed, your understanding of that text will have changed. It's true about any book that you read. It is all the more so true about any part of Torah, that it will speak to you in a different way. The example that I often give, is the story of Akedat Yitzchak, which is all good and fine until you actually have children. Or, the stories of Yosef and his brothers, all good and fine until you find yourself in a relationship with your own siblings as an adult. And that story reads very, very differently. So of course, we're supposed to revisit, and of course, we're supposed to come up with new perspectives ourselves. But what this is pointing out, Chazal are telling us, is that it's dangerous for all of your Torah to come from one source. If you really want to be a tree that is going to thrive, so you have to have more than one source of water. And I would just say, I think this is a great piece of advice for life in general, maybe not just in Torah wisdom, not just of getting a second opinion, which is very often a good idea, but when it comes to attributing any kind of perfection to one source. Only Hashem is perfect. So there is never going to be such a thing as a teacher or a rabbi or a rebbitzin or anyone else who is going to have all the answers for you. It's not possible. And if you think they do, then it won't end well. There's no way that is ever going to be the best way for a person to access Torah is through only one source, right? By definition, we are a multifaceted people. We ourselves are multifaceted, but Bnei Israel are a multifaceted people, and the Torah is so multifaceted. So why limit yourself? And so, we encourage ourselves to read from different authors, to listen to classes from different people, to open ourselves up. The more sources we have for learning Torah, the more meaningful it will be. And frankly, I think the more authentic. Right? It's never a good idea to have all your source of information only come from one place. Okay, the next few psukim of the parak contrast the righteous person that we've been describing, who is now thriving from having chosen this new environment, and he's thriving, but he is in a totally, or she is in a totally different place than the Rasha. So let's just finish up here. Lo kain harishaim, but this is not the case for the Rasha. As situated and as rooted and as thriving as the tree is in our description of the tzaddik. So 180 degrees, that's where you have the Rasha. And the description is it illustrates the point beautifully. Ki im kamotz asher tidfanu ruach. You know what the Rasha is like? The Rasha is like the chaff, the stuff that I always picture a dandelion. It's just and it's gone. There is nothing substantial. He's not anchored. He is not here for the long run. He will not be successful in the long run. The Rasha has no rooting. He has no kiyum, as we say, and that's actually what it says in the next pasuk. Al kain lo yakumu rishaim bamishpat. Therefore, the wicked, the evil, the rishaim, they won't it says survive judgments. Okay, lo yakumu, they won't stand up for judgment, meaning they will not have a leg to stand on. Nothing. They're going to fall apart. V'chataim ba'adat tzadikim, right? And those chataim that we mentioned also at the beginning, they can't hang out with the righteous. Ba'adat tzadikim, they have no place among them. You're talking about people who are on two different courses for life, and not only will they never cross, will they never overlap, but only one is sustainable. Only one has a kiyum. Only one will continue, whereas the other one is going to fall apart. And then David HaMelech finishes, Ki yodeya Hashem derech tzadikim v'derech reshaim toved. Because Hashem knows the path of the righteous, and the path of the wicked, well, that's just going to dissipate. It's going to be destroyed. So I just want to point out the language of Yodeya. In general, the language of Yedi'ah in Tanakh always refers to not just being familiar with something, but it refers to some kind of intimate knowledge, right? Vayeda Adam et Chava ishto, that Adam knew his wife Chava, refers to the fact that they lived together as husband and wife. They had an intimate relationship. Yedi'ah always refers to something that is much deeper than just a surface type of knowledge. It is a deep, intimate type of understanding, a deep type of awareness. And so Hashem is well aware, not just well aware, he has a deep, intimate understanding of the path of the righteous. Why? Because it's his. Right? Who is tzaddik if not Hashem himself? So he is super intimately familiar with the ways that the tzaddikim try to live their lives. Again, it's not with the tzaddikim themselves, it's with their derech, it's with their path. And Rav Hirsch points out that the language of Yediyah, everything he says is so beautiful. But one of the things he adds to our understanding of the word Yediyah is that it also implies some kind of protection, some kinds of looking out for, that by definition, because the tzaddikim have this derech, they have this approach, which we know is not the approach of the Rishaim, the Chataim, and the Leitzim, that inherent in this like deep connection that he has to them is the fact that he's always going to be looking out for their path. He's always going to keep an eye out for them, that he will help to sustain them. And then the derech rishaim toved is interesting that David HaMelech chose to describe the derech as opposed to the rishaim themselves. The derech of the tzaddikim instead of the tzaddikim themselves. So what's going to happen to the path of the rishaim? Toved, it's going to self-destruct. Like we said before, it's not anchored. It's made up of those, the dandelions, when you can blow them, the chaff, it's got nothing. It's just based on nothing. And so Hashem doesn't have to take an active role in destroying the path of the Rishaim. They're going to self-destruct. The path itself will cease to be. Now, as it turns out, that hasn't happened yet, but it's something that David HaMelech repeats, and this is one of the main themes throughout Tehilim, which is how it might seem that the wicked are prospering, but in the long run, that is never the case, that they have no kiyum, they have no sustainability. Whereas the derech of the tzaddikim, well, that's going to be around forever. The path of the righteous is going to be around forever. And I think just this language of derech here, and of course we started with the language of derech in Pasuk Aleph, is one of the ways, I don't know, I think you can maybe make the argument, I shared with you, I think the Gemara in Brachot that says that Aleph and Bet, Prakim Aleph and Bet are actually one. But I think, this makes an argument that the beginning and the end of Aleph also have a connection to each other, that the word derech repeats itself, that it's sort of the opposite of the Rishaim, the Chataim, and the Leitzim. And here again, we reference the Rishaim and the Tzaddikim being the opposite. I don't know, I would never go against the Gemara. So if the Gemara says it's both, it's both. That Aleph and Bet go together, it goes together. But I just linguistically, you see structurally, you see that David HaMelech was trying to create some kind of connection between the first pasuk and this last pasuk. But I think it's pasuk vav, is that right? Yeah, I think it's pasuk vav. I'm sorry, I didn't put the psukim in front. Yeah, pasuk vav. I didn't put the psukim here on the sheet. So there's this idea, which I think fits beautifully with what Rav Hirsch told us at the very beginning, which is that the concept of ashrei, that ishur, having permission, having the ability to make progress forward, fits beautifully with this idea of the derech, that we're not describing the people themselves, we're talking about their path, we're talking about their ways, right? And for some of us, I think the idea of becoming a tzaddik or a tzaddiket is like, I can't wrap my head around that. Okay, but could I go on the derech of the tzaddikim? Probably. If I could find the path, maybe I could follow it. Telling me that that Hashem has this intimate level of awareness and protection of the tzaddikim, well, that kind of puts it out of my league, right? Because we're not those people, at least not yet. So telling me that it's the derech, that Hashem knows the derech, that Hashem protects the derech of the tzaddikim, right? So that is a bit reassuring, right? That speaks to me a little bit more. It's a little bit more realistic for me. I can put myself on that path, and then I have chosen the path that Hashem says is sustainable, is successful, and God willing, my associations will be positive. I will choose a positive environment, and I will continue to move forward. I will continue to make progress. I will be fortunate. I will be praiseworthy, etc. And all our different descriptions of Ashrei. I just want to end our study of Parak Aleph here, going back to that idea I briefly mentioned before about the alliteration. I think that's the correct literature term of the alliteration, the Ashrei Ha'ish Asher. So I heard this amazing idea from someone named Rabbi Dov Lerner. He is British. And so everything he says sounds more intelligent than the way I'm going to say it to you. But you can find him on YU Torah. He's really, he can quote, he reminds me quite a bit of many of the other Torah scholars we're familiar with from England, which is that he has a familiarity with literature and philosophy that is not typically found outside of that great country. And he quotes the Greek philosophers and Shakespeare and the classic literature, the novels that we're familiar with that we had to read in school, quotes them just as easily as he can quote Tanakh. And he pointed out something. There was a book, I don't remember where I wrote it down, so I apologize for that. But he quotes a book that goes through similarities amongst all the languages. And what he pointed out is that there are almost no words or sounds, I should say sounds more than words. There are no sounds that are common to all of the languages. And I can't remember how many the book studied. The next time we meet, I'll try to have it in front of me. There are very few, if any, but there is one sound that is common to all of the languages that he studied. And that is the sound of shh. That if you say shh anywhere in the world, people will know what you're trying to tell them. Now, that's not really logical, because if you're familiar with other languages, so we know there are certain sounds that don't even appear in other languages that are very much part of our languages, both in Hebrew or in English or in French, right? But they don't always appear even in other, like in Hebrew, we're missing certain letters and we can't make the same sounds that you could make in English. Right? You have to put the little chuchik on top in order to get the J sound, for example. So the fact that there's such a thing as a universal sound for shushing is quite profound. And I just want to end on this idea that it really takes us back to that first, one of those first lessons that we mentioned, the idea of of the Ashrei Ha'ish Asher, in particular Asher Lo, who didn't do something, and that's really what shh means, right? It means the silence, the shushing means that according to David HaMelech, and again, he's a poet, so perhaps he really did mean to include this, or perhaps some brilliant scholars in more recent years understood that this is another layer of meaning that we can uncover in what David HaMelech wrote, which is that very often the key to success, the key to moving forward, the key to being fortunate and happy is very often wrapped up in what we don't do or what we don't say, which is the Ashrei Ha'ish Asher. And while obviously we are required, Yehege Yomam V'Layla, we have to articulate and we need to say and be active in our expression and in our study of Torah, that we want to weigh very carefully what does come out of our mouth. That the approach in general, as we know, Chazal are very big fans of silence. They have so much to say about people who know how to keep their mouths quiet. They are the wisest. They are the ones you should be learning from. They have the best midot. So we'll, maybe for another time, we'll talk about it if it comes up again in Tehilim. But siag l'chachma shtika, right? Even shtika starts with a shin, right? Shtok, right? Which means to close the mouth, right? To be quiet. So Chazal are big fans of measuring our words very carefully, of refraining, abstaining from sharing things that don't need to be shared. But by that same token, of course, it's not enough. We know that you're not supposed to be quiet all the time. There are many times where we're supposed to open our mouths. We have to stand up for what's right. We have to offer a kind word to somebody, of course. And what David HaMelech chooses to focus on in Pasuk Bet here is, of course, also that our mouths should be filled with the words of Torah, that we should be searching for the Torah, and we should be searching for our place in it to find what is specifically ours. And then, as we mentioned before, to try, once we find that piece that calls to us, that speaks to us, to try to immerse ourselves in it, to have that be what our mouths are busy with, that if we're not shushing, then we are studying, we are learning, we are developing our connection to Hashem and to His Torah. And that is just, one other idea in this parak of Tehilim that really is here to describe for us the path of the righteous versus the path of the wicked, and how obviously David HaMelech is begging us, encouraging us to choose the path of the righteous. Okay, you could want to be righteous, but don't wait till you wake up one day till you're righteous to decide to join the path of the righteous. The path of the righteous, all that it requires is a couple of steps. It requires the ashrei, it requires the ishor, the steps forward. The rest will take care of itself. You just pick the right path, stay on the right path, don't falter, don't be confused just because it looks like the Rishaim's path is a lot more fun, that there's more parties happening on that path, or that they're laughing harder or having a better time. Their path is toved. It will not last. And Hashem doesn't even have to take an active role. It's going to just, it's going to self-destruct. It's going to implode. And so this is our chizuk, our strength, as we finish up with Parak Aleph. I think I'm going to stop here. I'll just mention that, as we mentioned last time, that Parak Bet is a continuation of Parak Aleph. The themes are very similar. There are many, many different ideas. But if you're curious to study Parak Bet on your own, I think we won't do it together, but if you're curious to study it on your own, it very much is this is a personal, individual Parak Aleph. Parak Bet is sort of the more national expression of the same questions, right? The king is wondering why is everybody rebelling? Why is everybody having, what's going on here? And it's sort of a back and forth trying to understand, right? If I do the right thing as the king, shouldn't everybody be behaving? It's a very similar theme to Parak Aleph. There are different ideas, new ideas. There's a reference to birthdays and all sorts of other interesting things in Parak Bet. It's a beautiful parak. But as we mentioned, according to the Gemara and Brachot, it is actually Parak Aleph and Bet are one parak. And the proof they have is that it ends with the word Ashrei, which we said, whenever we see the word Ashrei, that is our hint that this was a particular favorite of King David's, David HaMelech. If something was chaviv to him, he threw the word Ashrei in there. So at some point, God willing, I hope we'll study the Ashrei, the one that we say in Shacharit, in Psukei Zimra. But that will wrap up our study of Parak Aleph and a little bit of Parak Bet. Thank you all so much for coming. I just want to mention there is a women's Rosh Chodesh class tomorrow night, 8:00, right here on the Zoom social hall. It is sponsored in honor of Judy Pekowski. So she has a special birthday coming up. So we're looking forward to celebrating her. With her husband and her children. But the women's Rosh Chodesh class for Tevet will be tomorrow night. We are actually going to be studying a parak of Tehilim. I guess I was just in Tehilim mode when I was looking for something to prepare. We are going to be studying Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid, which is Tehilim chapter 30, parak Lamed. It is the parak that many people have the custom to say, in addition to the fact that it's part of our morning davening every day, which we will speak about why, but also many people have the custom to say it every day of Chanukah. In addition, like at the end of the davening, like after you say, the Shir Shel Yom for Monday, you also say Mizmor Shir Chanukah Tabayit LeDavid. So it's a magnificent parak of Tehilim. I've been really enjoying studying it. And so that will be the topic for the Rosh Chodesh class tomorrow night. So if you can come, we'd love to have you, love to see you. Have a wonderful day. A happy Hanukkah, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we are going to be on break for a few weeks. The shul will send out an email when we're back on. I'm guessing if this time slot, everyone, if people are interested in continuing, that we would pick up, I think we said Monday, January 11th.
Yeah. And then Taylor. Thank you, Rifki. You're amazing.
Thank you. Oh, Renee Mazel Tov.
Oh, thank you.
I was going to call you today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mazel Tov on a new house.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebbitzin.
Best news. Best news.
Baruch Hashem. Very good. Thank
Dean
God.
is okay?
Yeah, thank God.
Thank God.
A little hectic, but thank God.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
Thank you,
Rifki.
Rifki. Have a good vacation.
Anyway, Rifki, you're amazing, Rifki. You're really amazing. I'm so enjoying learning this with you. Thank you. So beautiful.
Thanks.
What time is your shir tomorrow? What time did you say the shir is tomorrow?
Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. God willing.
Okay, God willing. Anyway, thank you, Rifki. You're amazing. Are we having this class next week, or when are you on break?
I'm on break after today till January 11th, God willing.
Okay, good. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Mazel tov.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, everybody. So nice.
Good to see you.